So welcome everybody, and thank you so much for your patience. We've had a wonderful magical mystery tour tonight. If any of you have tried to get up to the exhibition upstairs, it was a bit dark and spooky. I was thinking that the dinosaurs might start coming to life. Welcome to everybody. Welcome to you who've made it back from the scary dinosaurs and back into the nice, safe lecture theatre. My name is Kate Phillips, and I'd like to welcome you to our lecture on gut feelings by Professor Felice Jacka as part of our focus on this fascinating topic, which is also the topic of our new exhibition by the same name. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we are on today, the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders both past, present, and to young emerging leaders. Tonight we are live streaming the lecture, so I'd also like to welcome all of you who are watching us online. After our speaker tonight, there will be time for questions, and for those of you who are watching the live stream, you can send your questions via Twitter, and we'll try and include them also. Our Twitter handle is @lecturesmv, and please tag the lectures with the questions with hashtag lecturesmv. And now's also the moment to check that your phones are on silent. Before Felice comes up to talk to us, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Joanna Simpkin. She's the Senior Curator of Human Biology and Medicine and has been the driving force behind the exhibition Gut Feelings. She's going to give us a quick overview of the exhibition and the ideas that lay behind it, and then introduce Professor Jacka. So do welcome Joanna Simpkin.
Well, thank you, Kate. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're on, the Boonwurrung and the Woiwurrung peoples, and honour their ancestors, elders, and next generations of community. And I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker tonight. Professor Felice Jacka is Director of the Food and Mood Centre at Deakin University and founder and president of the International Society for Nutritional Psychiatry Research. Felice is here tonight because the museum is currently abuzz with all things guts. Our new exhibition, Gut Feelings, looks into the gut-brain connection and the role that microbes play. I hope by now a few of you might have had a chance to walk through the pink gut labyrinth that we've created and even run your hands through our rubbery gut villi wall. It's a chance for you to meet your microbes, the 38 trillion friends you share a very intimate relationship with. You'll see just how beautiful they are in our gut tunnel and walk with them as they float in peristaltic waves, sweeping you along the gut tunnel, which is the same length as your own gut. You can soak in our bubbly soundscape and watch dynamic scanning electron microscope images of real microbes, and even have microbes projected onto your own body with our smart mirrors. Our evolution room shows that you've evolved from and with microbes, and you can feed your guts in our food fight game. We have our billion-year-old microbe display, which we invite you to come and touch, and we even talk superbugs and placentas. If you're after some more detail, you can sink your teeth into our gut-brain network display with the help of some weird and wonderful objects, including the vagus nerve electrode, our notorious fatberg, and other real Melbourne research stories. Appropriately, one of our last rooms is our poo transplant room. And if you haven't heard of these yet, we've interviewed experts to answer all your burning what, how, why questions. We've even incorporated our world-first living installation, a map of Melbourne's microbes, and here we're inviting 1,000 museum visitors to contribute their microbe-containing spit to ask, what can your microbes say about you? It will grow with data throughout the exhibition, and this is a collaborative effort with the Doherty and the University of Melbourne. The most challenging part of making this exhibition was creating a space that was beautiful and really allowed a big shift of thinking for many people, that not all microbes are bad germs that we have to kill 99% of, but rather many of these are good for you. And in fact, these little guys, bacteria, fungi and more, sit in our tummy, eat the food we eat, and communicate to our bodies and minds, largely through tiny molecules they make called short-chain fatty acids. When I began doing the background research for this exhibition, I soon discovered Felice's work, and in fact she advised us on our now Insta-famous food room, which shows a year's worth of good-for-your-guts foods. What excites me about her work is that it provides a social context for these biological discoveries. The concept of being able to treat something as complex and hard to reach as the human brain through something as simple as diet is a newly powerful one, thanks to these modern molecular and microbial understandings. Felice has pioneered and led an innovative program of research that examines how an individual's diet and other lifestyle behaviours interact with their risk for mental health problems. Her current work focuses closely on the links between diet, gut health, and mental and brain health. This research is being carried out with the ultimate goal of developing new, evidence-based prevention and treatment strategies for mental disorder. So please help me welcome Felice to the stage.
Thanks so much, Jo. I'll wait for them up there to put the presentation up. But I wanted to say thank you to Kate and to Jo for inviting me to do this tonight. It's been a really fun experience to be involved in the development of the exhibition, and it was great to see it in real life tonight. I had a good time looking at it. And I also really enjoy doing talks to the general public, and I find that there's a huge interest in the area of research that I lead because everybody eats and everybody has a brain. And of course, everyone is affected by mental health or mental health problems, whether it's themselves personally or loved ones or even just in their community. So the idea that nutrition and mental and brain health might be linked is a really important one. But it's also a relatively new one. So what I'm going to do is just start by talking about what we know so far in this new field of what we call nutritional psychiatry, which we have largely led around the world. And then we'll segue into speaking about the gut, because we think that this is a key pathway that we may be able to target to have an impact on mental and brain disorders. So I've got slides. I'm going to use those slides really just as the starting point for a conversation. A lot of what I'm going to talk about actually won't be represented in the slides, largely because it's too new, or it's stuff that is just about to start or is just underway now. So there's a lot of exciting things, and I guess that's a really key point about both of the topics of this talk, nutritional psychiatry and the gut and its impact on mental and brain health. They're both very new areas, and certainly as far as the gut stuff goes, we are having new discoveries almost every week. And those of us trying to keep up, those of us in the research area trying to keep on top of all the new findings and the new understandings, our heads are kind of spinning. So the new understanding about the bacteria that live on and in us and their influence on our health is really transforming medicine in a way similar to how the discovery of ultra-small particles changed physics, because it's given us a whole new way of thinking about health. So I'm going to start off, as I said, with some of the evidence and the information about diet and how it affects mental and brain health, and then start to talk about the gut and some of the details there, and of course very happy to answer questions at the end. So this is the first part of the study. I am, as we said, Director of the Food and Mood Centre at Deakin University. That's a very new centre. We've only been in existence for a couple of years. The research I've led is less than 10 years old, this whole field. And we are having a big impact internationally, which is a very exciting place to be. But I also have honorary positions with the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, where I've done a lot of research, the University of Melbourne and the Black Dog Institute up in New South Wales. So we collaborate very widely in Australia but also overseas. So the context that I always start with is the really profound changes to the global food system. So Big Food figured out over 100 years ago that they could manufacture food products that were highly palatable. People really liked them. They had a very long shelf life. They were very cheap. They could be moved around. And of course, that kick-started a whole change to our food system that started to result in a really obvious increase in obesity and chronic disease in the West, which is now spreading to the rest of the globe, to the extent that now unhealthy diet is the leading cause of early death in men and number 2 in women across the globe. Overweight now kills more people than underweight. But of course, it's not just about weight. What we know is the impact of unhealthy diet on our health can actually operate quite independently of body weight. So this is an important theme that I'll come back to. What do we mean when we say poor diet? And here we're looking at this big global burden of disease study that brings together everything we know about food and health and about disease and what causes disease and the cost and the burden of disease. And it's from that huge study that we know about the impact of unhealthy diets and the terrible burden that they're imposing. But these are diets that are low in fruits and vegetables, in whole grains, in nuts and seeds and fibre, in the healthy fats, the omega-3 fatty acids and the monounsaturated fatty acids. So not getting enough of the good stuff is problematic. But quite independently, having diets that have got too much of the bad stuff is also a problem. So red meat and processed meats, added sugars, sugar-sweetened beverages, trans fats and sodium, all of the things that we find in these ultra-processed food products that now make up approximately 60% of the dietary energy intake of Americans. In Australia, it's a bit better. It's about 35%, 40% in young people. But, you know, we're really not doing very well. Less than 5% of adults consume the recommended intake of vegetables and legumes in Australia, and less than 0.5% of children. So whilst there's a small percentage of the population that is eating a good healthy diet, the very large proportion of the population is not. And this is because of the impact of big food on our eating habits, such that these ultra-processed food products are now the most ubiquitous, the cheapest, the most heavily marketed and the most socially acceptable. And this, of course, has resulted in a massive impact on our health. The WHO estimates that it will cost the global economy more than $30 trillion by the year 2030 and makes the point that there's no economy in the world that can afford the costs linked to it. And of course, it increases our risk for early death through cancer, heart disease, stroke, high blood pressure, obesity, diabetes, all of these things. But what's not been taken into account, because the research is so new, is the impact of poor diet on mental and brain health. And the reason that's important is that mental disorders, so mental and substance use disorders, actually account for the leading global burden of disability. So whilst they do also shorten lifespan, particularly depression, which is that big blue section that you're looking at, and the red section is anxiety disorders. These are called the common mental disorders for a very good reason. They impose a huge burden of disability across the globe, not just in the developed world, but in the developing world as well. They impact on people's ability to study and to work and to participate fully in society. And of course, they prompt chronic disease. So depression, for example, is a risk factor for obesity and high blood pressure and cardiovascular disease. And those conditions in turn increase the risk of depression. And that's because we think of the underlying factors that lead to depression and other mental health problems and chronic disease. And one of the key ones is poor diet. So what do we know so far? I'm going to give you just a snapshot. This study was my PhD study, and I show it because it represents the first study to actually look at this. It's a really interesting thing. When I came into psychiatry research, almost no studies had looked at the link between diet and nutrition and mental health. So we had many, many, many studies that had shown us for many years that the quality of what we ate was linked to our risk for physical conditions. But there's been this idea that somehow the brain and the body are separate, and that has really informed a lot of psychiatry and psychology. And for that reason, people hadn't really thought about what you put in your mouth might have an influence on your mental and brain health. But around the time that I started my PhD, there was a lot of really interesting research coming out of the US showing that this key part of the brain, the hippocampus, put on new neurons throughout life. We used to think that we only had the neurons in our brain that we were born with, and we just lost them over time. But then they started to discover there was a couple of regions in the brain where you grow new neurons all the time. And a key part, one of these, is called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is a small region of the brain that's very important in learning and memory. We think this growth of new neurons all the time is what part of the process of learning and remembering things. So it helps us to study. It helps us with our general brain power. But we also know that it's intricately linked to mental health. We think it's a key target of antidepressant medications, the hippocampus. And what these animal studies were showing was that if you manipulate diet in animals, you very quickly can change the hippocampus, the function, so you can see that it has an impact on cognition and learning and memory in the animals, but also the proteins that kind of grow the new neurons. I think of it like manure for the brain. So unhealthy dietary components would reduce those proteins and healthy ones would increase them. So there was a lot of really interesting studies coming from animal research. Also around that time, we were starting to realise that the immune system played a really important role in mental and brain health. So again, that the mind and the body were not separate, they're linked together. In fact, we're one highly, highly complex, fully integrated system. Very complicated. We probably know a lot more about outer space than we know about the physical body. It's so complex. But the immune system, so if you have an accident and you break your arm or you get a virus or infection, your immune system jumps into action to help you heal. That's fantastic. That's what they're supposed to do. But there's a lot of things now that in our Western lifestyle seem to prompt what we call inflammation. This is this low-grade chronic activation of the immune system. And we know that that's really bad for us, and that's also a risk factor for depression. And of course, what is one of the key things that influences inflammation in the immune system? It's diet. We already knew that. So for that reason, I also thought that it would be really useful to look at diet and its possible link to mental health. So we did this study in a large randomly selected population sample of women, very representative of the Australian population. We did detailed psychiatric assessments, very detailed information gathered on people's diets. We took into account all of the things that could link diet and mental health. So things like people's education and their income and body weight and other health behaviours like exercise. We took all of those into account. And what we saw was, as I expected, that women who had healthier diets, in this case Western diets, what we call Western diets, they're really ubiquitous. You know, we see them across the West, but now, of course, we're seeing them in Brazil and India and China and everything else. But they're the diets that we see, the foods that we see everywhere, even when we go to fill up our car with petrol. And women who had higher scores on this Western dietary pattern were much more likely to have a clinical depressive disorder and higher levels of symptoms. While women who had what we called a traditional diet, because in an Australian context it was kind of like meat and 3 veg, but it was fruit and vegetables, fish, whole grains, those sorts of foods, they were much less likely to have either clinical depressive disorders or anxiety disorders, even after taking those other things into account. Now, that study had a big impact. I was very fortunate that I was able to break new ground, because that allowed me to then go on and do a lot more research around the world, and many other people joined me in that. So now, less than 10 years later, we have a very comprehensive body of evidence that tells us that the quality of our diets are very clearly linked to our risk for depression in particular. And it's not explained by those other factors I mentioned, and it's also not explained by something called reverse causality, which is when you eat differently because of your mental health. We see studies across America, Canada, China, Japan, Spain, Norway, Australia, Britain, all very, very consistent in their findings. And of course, healthy diets look different in different countries. A healthy Spanish Mediterranean style diet is different to a healthy British one, which is different to a healthy Norwegian one or a healthy Japanese one. But what they have at their heart is a higher intake of whole foods, foods that have not been interfered with. So plant foods, vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, seeds, fish, healthy fats. And they're lower in the foods that we know that we really need to avoid. But even more importantly to me, I feel, is the potential here for prevention, because the data that we and others have generated now tells us that diet is very clearly linked to young people's mental health. And half of all mental disorders first appear before the age of 14 years. So I'm the immediate past president of the Australian Alliance for the Prevention of Mental Disorders. If we think about risk factors for mental disorders, they're things like family history, early life trauma, poverty and disadvantage, life stress. These are all things that are quite difficult to change. If we want to prevent disorders starting in the first place, we need to think about things that we can change, things that are modifiable. We've known for quite a while that physical activity and exercise is protective of people's mental health. But now we know that young people's diets is very clearly linked to their mental health. So again, we led the first study with the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. We looked at more than 7,000 young people around Australia and again saw that the quality of their diets was very clearly linked to their mental health. Even when we took into account things such as family conflict, poor family management, adolescent dieting, those sorts of things. And again, this finding has been shown over and over again in young people. And even right back at the start of life, we've known for a long time that early life nutritional exposures are linked to health outcomes in infants and as they grow into adulthood. But we did a study in more than 23,000 mothers and their children in Norway. And we saw, as we expected, that the diet that mums ate during pregnancy, if they had more of these junk and processed foods, their kids had more of what we call externalising behaviours. So that's anger and tantrums and aggression. And independent of a whole range of other factors we were able to take into account, including the mother's mental health. But also in this study, what the kids ate was really important. So kids who had diets that were higher in the good stuff, in the fruits and vegetables and yogurt and fish and the components of a healthy traditional Norwegian diet, they had lower levels of these internalising, which is sadness and anxiety and depression type behaviours, and externalising behaviours. And then quite independently, those who had more of the junk and processed foods were worse off. These are often independent of each other, because if you think about it, you probably know people who have, particularly young people, really healthy diets at home, but then before, during and after school, they're having a whole lot of junk food. Or older people who are not necessarily going out and having Macca's and Kentucky Fried, but they're also just having a very limited kind of white food, white bread sausage type of diet at home. So both of those things are independently linked to poor mental health outcomes. So thinking about prevention, this is really important. Diet and exercise, these are things we can change and that we need to change. But I'm going to talk a bit about the brain. You remember I said at the start that there were these studies coming out of America about the impact of diet on the hippocampus. And there were many, many studies following that up. So it was shown over and over again. But we actually looked at this in humans for the first time. So we had a big sample of older adults with our collaborators at the ANU in Canberra. And we'd already established in these older people that those who had healthier diets were less likely to develop depression as they got older. Depression in older age is very common. It's kind of depressing, getting old, but your body is ageing and your brain is ageing, and that can have an impact on your mental health as well as your physical health. And so we looked at these people. We'd already seen that diet was important there, so we took into account all of the possible explanatory variables, including whether or not they were depressed. And we looked at the quality of their diet and the size of their hippocampus. Now, what we saw is that the hippocampus shrinks. We had measures at one time point and then 4 years later. And on average, everyone's hippocampus got smaller, which is really depressing. That's why we start to lose our keys and forget our kids' names and those sorts of things. But what we very clearly saw was those who had healthier diets had a much larger hippocampus than those who had unhealthier diets. And this wasn't just a trivial difference, this was a really big difference. Now that again has now been shown in 2 other far larger studies just in the last 12 months. So it's saying that diet matters to your brain power and your brain health, which is of course important across the lifespan, not just in older age. And we've known for a long time that people with healthier diets are less likely to develop dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So this could be one of the possible pathways by which this is protective. Now I'm going to talk about this study because it's had a really major impact internationally, which is wonderful. And we set out to try and answer that $64 million question: if I'm depressed and I improve my diet, will it help my depression? Because of course correlation doesn't equal causation. You can have a million studies linking 2 things, but you can never be perfectly sure that one is causally related to the other. You can only do that through experiments. So in the SMILE study, we recruited people with major depressive disorder and we randomly assigned them to get either social support, which we already know is helpful for people with depression, or dietetic support from a dietitian. And the dietitian helped the people in the diet group over a 3-month period to make these fundamental and very simple changes to their diet, to swap out their sweet cereals and white bread for whole grains and oats and those sorts of things, to introduce fish and legumes, to increase the fruits and vegetables that they were eating, to use lots of olive oil, and to, of course, decrease the junk and processed foods that they were eating. We didn't honestly think that it was going to have impact. We didn't think that we were going to see a difference between the group, mainly because we couldn't recruit all the people that we wanted to recruit. We'd hoped to recruit 160 people. We recruited 67. At that time, there was just so much scepticism about the idea that diet might be important in mental health. But what we found was really staggering. There was a massive difference between the groups. So in any depression trial, you'll see that people will get better by themselves, so both groups will improve. But in the dietary group, more than 30% of people went on to have full clinical remission compared to about 8% in the social support group. And what was really cool was that the extent of dietary change correlated really closely with the extent of change in their mental health symptoms. So in other words, the more they improved their diet, the more their mental health improved. The other really cool thing about this was we did very detailed cost modelling to look at the cost of our diet compared to the cost of the junk food diet people were eating when they first came into the study. And we found that our diet was cheaper. Because we weren't saying go out and buy organic and fresh berries and fish and meat. We were saying it's fine to use frozen vegetables or vegetables in season from the grocer. It's fine to use tinned fish and tinned legumes and dried beans. In fact, they're really cheap. Dried beans, I live on them. They're really, really inexpensive. So this idea that it has to be more expensive is not borne out by the data. But the other thing we found, we did a detailed economic evaluation, and what we found was that people who got the dietary support, on average, there was a cost saving of about $3,000 per participant compared to those who got the social support. Why? Because they lost less time out of role, so they were less impaired, and they saw other health professionals less often. So this suggests that it's having a benefit to the whole person, not just bits of their brain. And very happily, colleagues of ours replicated this study a few months later in a larger group of people. They found very similar to us that there was a real benefit to helping people to improve their diet. That again, the more people improved their diet, the more benefit they got, and really key again that there was a massive cost savings. Now in Australia, something like 60% of presentations to GPs are for depression or depressive symptoms, or have that as a major contributing factor. We have had no new pharmaceutical treatments for depression for decades. All of the money and effort that we've invested in reducing stigma and increasing access to medications and things has not had an impact on that population level of psychological distress. So we need not instead of, but we need to add in new things that we know are going to be helpful to people, but that are also going to be cost effective, because this is costing the Australian economy billions and billions of dollars every year. So we think one of the key things that could be done very simply is to make sure that people with mental disorders can access a dietitian at the first instance. We know that people with very serious mental disorders, they're much more inclined to have chronic illnesses, and there's a 20-year mortality gap. They die on average 20 years earlier than the general population. And we know that diet and exercise, what we call lifestyle medicine approaches, can really help to mitigate that impact on their health. So for all of those reasons, we think it's really important that we start to think about lifestyle medicine as the fundamental of treatment, with other things added in on top. Really importantly though, you can't just vitamin your way out of things. Unfortunately, very, very little evidence that vitamin supplements are of any use at all for depression. So it really is, diet is a very complex thing. In any given food, there are just so many compounds and they all interact in very, very complex ways. So taking a vitamin pill or a supplement, I'm afraid, is not going to do the trick. So as I said, we're now very, very interested in looking at how the gut might influence this or be involved in this link between diet and mental and brain health. All of the information about the gut we've really just learned in the last few years because of new gene sequencing techniques. And what we know is that those things I talked about before, brain plasticity, and the immune system, the gut plays a very important role in those, the gut bacteria. We've known for a long time that the gut and the brain are linked by something called the vagus nerve, and there's this constant communication channel, most of the information going from the gut to the brain and about 10% going from the brain to the gut. But what we didn't know about was the bacteria that live in there and just how important they are. So we have more than 100 trillion microbes that live on and in us. At least half of our cells are microbial. And the very vast majority of our genetic material is actually not even human. And we are starting to understand that the microbiota, particularly the microbiota that lives in our gut, but that we think that the oral is also important, has a big role to play in our metabolism and our body weight, our immune system, and our mood and behaviour. So how do we know this? How do we know that our gut bacteria are in some way linked to our behaviour or our brain health? Well, there's quite a few lines of evidence. It's important to understand, though, this is a very, very new field. Most of what we know we get from animal studies. There is not enough information in humans, and that's what we're doing at the Food and Mood Centre, is generating human data, and this is a really important thing to do. But we do know that when you breed mice without any bacteria, so these bacteria that co-evolved with us, we can't live without them, they can't live without us, but you can breed a mouse in a vacuum. And you can breed a mouse that's called a germ-free mouse that doesn't have bacteria. And those mice are very strange. They have a very altered stress response. They have altered brain plasticity, which is that hippocampal change in volume that I talked about. They have profoundly altered levels of neurotransmitters, altered behaviours, altered immune function. Their blood-brain barrier is impaired. They have all of these changes, and this is how one of the reasons we know that the early life gut microbiota of an infant, as well as being very important in training its immune system, it also, we think, is very important in brain development. So getting that right is a really key issue for society. Experimental evidence. Again, if you stress out a rodent, but then add in probiotics, you can actually mitigate some of that stress response and the depressive and anxiety behaviours in an animal. There's been many studies done to look at this and to show this. So again, we can see that somehow these bacteria are doing something that influences the behaviour of the animal. Upstairs at the exhibition, there was a great interview talking about stool transplants, FMT. Now, this has been a first-line treatment for very nasty bowel diseases for quite a long time. We're actually just about to trial FMT capsules in humans with major depressive disorder. There's evidence to suggest that it may be helpful, because what we know is that if you take poo from someone with depression and you put it into an animal, you can induce depression in that animal, or what we call depressive-like behaviours in that animal. That's been shown many times now. You can also do that with high blood pressure. You take poo from someone with high blood pressure, you can induce high blood pressure in the animal. They've just recently shown the similar thing in schizophrenia. Taking poo from someone with schizophrenia, putting it into an animal, they see changes in the metabolism of different aspects of the animal that are similar to what we see in schizophrenia. And it's from this we know that there's a causal relationship. It means the bacteria are doing something. This is a really exciting new study, and we're going to see more and more of these studies being published. This study was a probiotics trial, a randomised controlled trial. They took people with mania. They'd been hospitalised with bipolar disorder. When they got out of hospital, they randomly assigned them to probiotics or to placebo, and they found that those who got the probiotics, it took a lot longer for them to get sick again and go back to hospital. So this is a really exciting study. But of course, the main factors influencing microbiota, of all these factors, the most important is diet. And what's really exciting about diet is that you can change it, and you can change it very quickly. Now, how does this work? Of course, I would need a long time to explain really in comprehensive detail how things work. But very simply speaking, the major role of your gut microbes is to break down dietary fibres, to break down bits of the food that our human enzymes can't break down. Dietary fibre, it's in whole grains and legumes and fruits and vegetables. It's plant foods. And when they break this fibre down, they ferment it. And what happens is that all these metabolites are produced. And some of the ones that have been studied the most are called short-chain fatty acids. That's that SCFA, short-chain fatty acids. These have all sorts of roles in the body. I can't emphasise how important they are. They interact with virtually every cell in the body by something called G protein coupled receptors. And what they do is they influence the way genes work all through your body. They play a very important role in your immune system. The short-chain fatty acid butyrate, which comes from eating fibre, plays a very important role in the health of your gut lining. Have you heard of this idea of leaky gut? When the health of your gut lining is impaired and the contents of the gut spill into the bloodstream, and then you get this immune response. So butyrate is really important for keeping the gut lining healthy. So we know that eating a diet that's high in fibre, which means a diet that's high in plant food, is really important. If the bacteria don't have the food to ferment, they can't do all of the things that they're supposed to do. They can't influence your metabolism and your immune system and the health of your brain and everything else because they don't have food. And what they can do too is to start to eat the gut lining. And we don't eat anywhere near enough fibre in the West. Remember what I said right at the start? Less than 0.5% of children, less than 5% of adults. This is a major problem. This is a little study, one of the first studies in the field, big impact, showed they took 10 people and they put them on either a high plant-based diet or an animal-based diet with meat, eggs and cheese for only a few days. And they showed very profound changes in the microbes that lived in those people's guts and their metabolites, these short-chain fatty acids. So the ones that got the plant foods, they had more of these really beneficial short-chain fatty acids such as butyrate. The ones that got the animal foods diet, what they had was more of sorts of bacteria that we know are linked to inflammatory bowel disease, things called Bolophila. We see that Bolophila seems to be induced by the consumption of saturated fat. Saturated fats that, of course, we get in animal products and fatty meats and those sorts of things seem to promote Bolophila, and in turn, Bolophila in animal experiments can induce illness. This is another really important study. They took people from African Americans eating a typical American diet, really awful diet, and South Africans from rural areas in South Africa. They looked at their diets. Of course, they were very, very different. They looked at their gut microbiomes. They were very, very different. Much more diversity in the South Africans. We think diversity is a marker of good gut health. And also there were many more of these inflammatory markers in the bowels of the African Americans, and these are indicative of bowel cancer risk. But the really cool thing is that they swapped their diets for 2 weeks, and in 2 weeks they made major changes to the health parameters of people's bowels. So the poor African Americans who got the fibre, all their inflammatory markers in the bowel went down, but they went up in the poor South Africans. So again, it's saying you can change your health status very quickly by changing your diet. This is really encouraging. If you think about diversity and the diversity of the foods we used to eat compared to now with our modern agricultural diets, you can see that it's shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And then, of course, you've got the issue of farm animals and intensive agricultural production where more than 80% of antibiotics are actually used. Now, do you know what they use antibiotics for in cattle and chicken production? Apart from prophylactically to keep them from getting sick, they use them to fatten them up. So think about that for a minute. When you eat those animal products and you're eating the antibiotics, and it's had a really nasty impact on the diversity of our gut, and we are losing microbes. Martin Blaser has a great book called Missing Microbes that tells you all about it. But of course, these changes, this is a study that was done by some really cool microbiologists in the US. They wanted to understand what would be the impact of a low-fibre diet, like a Western diet, over generations. They used animals, and they showed that after 4 generations of a low-fibre diet, there was this wholesale extinction of bacteria, and they couldn't be returned even when you gave the animals fibre again. They could only get them back through a fecal transplant. So our modern diets, we think, may be really spelling trouble for even the human race, because there's some of the bacteria that if we lose them, we may not be able to regain them, and they may be essential for our long-term survival. And of course, these changes have correlated with a massive increase in allergic disease, and we think that this may relate to the fact that the early life microbiota plays such an important role in training our immune system. And of course, what you also have now are many, many children born by caesarean section where they're exposed to antibiotics. We don't know whether that's causally related to poor health outcomes in the kids, but it is really concerning because it's another area where the newborn gut, which is so important, is exposed to antibiotics, which can have a really negative impact. So this is something else we need to be thinking about and doing research on. Artificial sweeteners. Now, this is only one study, so I think we have to be a little bit careful, but it's a very cool study done in Nature where they looked in an animal model again. They looked at common artificial sweeteners such as aspartame, and they showed that these sweeteners actually changed the gut microbiota in a way that would predispose to weight gain. So even though they don't have their own calories, they may actually contribute to weight via change in the gut microbes and body weight. Now, we don't know that for sure. We don't know that in humans as yet, but it does give us pause for thought. The other thing too are dietary emulsifiers, which are so ubiquitous in processed foods. That mucosal lining that keeps the gut healthy, they act like detergent to that. We already have data showing that people with depression have more antibodies in their blood to bacteria that really should be in the gut and not in the blood. So indicative of this idea of leaky gut, of bacteria getting into the bloodstream and actually causing problems. And emulsifiers in processed foods we think are really nasty for the gut lining. Again, most of the studies are in animals, so we can't say for sure, but they are the basic processes in animals are the same as in humans. So I think that we should be being really cautious about our consumption of processed foods in regards to our gut, and not just because of the other health problems that go along with them. And the final thing too is that new evidence from animal studies is suggesting that high blood glucose may induce leaky gut as well. Now, we know that high blood glucose, even within the normal range, but up the high level of that normal range, is linked to a very large burden of strokes and heart disease and a whole lot of poor health outcomes, including dementia, even if you don't have outright diabetes. So it's another reason to keep your blood sugar low and steady. So again, all of this is very new information. We don't know whether it's true in humans yet, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So what should we eat and what should we not? Good for guts. Fermented foods, these are really interesting. Rather than taking probiotics, which is just the bacteria, and we still don't know which bugs are good, and we think that any given bug can do a lot of different things. It might be a bad guy or a good guy depending on what else is going on in the gut. But with fermented foods, you get the prebiotics, which is the food for the bacteria. You get some live bacteria, but you get a lot of dead bacteria because once they've eaten all the food, they die. But even that dead bacteria has an impact on our immune function. But what you really get are the fermentation products, the metabolites. And in fact, you even get neurotransmitters in fermented foods. So fermented foods are things like kefir and kombucha and sauerkraut and a lot of the Japanese foods, tempeh. So that's a really good way to, we think, have a benefit to your gut, and we're hoping to do some research on the possible benefit of these for mental health in the near future. Olive oil looks like it's really good. Fibre, of course, we've already discussed. The polyunsaturated fatty acids, that's what you get from fish oil. So the oils that you get from fish, from olive oil, from avocados, from nuts and seeds, these seem to be beneficial to the gut, whereas the saturated fats seem to be problematic based on what we know so far. Polyphenols are the aspects of plant foods that are found particularly in very highly coloured plant foods, so blueberries and red wine and dark chocolate and some of the nice things, coffee and tea. These not only seem to be beneficial for the gut, but based on what we know from animal experiments, they may actually help to prevent weight gain. So another good reason to eat veggies. And bad, of course, based on what we know so far, saturated fat, processed foods, added sugars, refined carbohydrates, binge drinking seems to have a really nasty impact on the gut lining. Again, probiotics, there's some evidence that they may be of benefit for some people under some conditions, but they're also expensive, and you're only getting a bit of what you need. I would say, personally, I would use fermented foods rather than probiotics. It'd save my money. And you can make your own kefir at home. It's really fun. The Food and Mood Centre, as I said, it's unique in the world. We are running more than 20 different research projects, 15 of which focus on this triad of diet, the gut and mental health. And importantly, all of our studies are in humans. They're all set up to try and answer questions that are of real relevance to the general public. What should I eat? What works for whom under what circumstances? We really need to answer a lot of questions. We need to extend what we're doing from common mental disorders, depression and anxiety, to more serious schizophrenia, etc. There's a huge amount of work to do. It's exceptionally difficult to get funding in this climate, and particularly for something as new as gut microbiota research. So we've been very fortunate to get support from philanthropy, and that's something that we continue to pursue because it's allowing us to do research that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do, because it's almost impossible getting funding from the government for this. But if people are interested, they can go to that website and have a look, and there's a lot of information there. We're just about to zhuzh the website and make it bigger and better, and we will keep adding more information that's very useful for the general public. And I've also just published a book in February this year with Pan Macmillan that's designed for the general public. It's called Brain Changer, and apparently it's for sale in the museum shop upstairs. But that outlines all the evidence and has all of the information for you to be able to decide what you would like to eat and for your family's health and your own health. So thank you very much. I'm sorry I've gone a little bit over time, but I think we started a little bit late. Certainly happy to answer questions as they come up.
Thank you so much, Felice. I'm sure there'll be some questions. Now, if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and just wait for a microphone to come to you. And we'll start off actually with the person up the back who's very keen to ask a question.
And don't be shy, there's no stupid questions. I'm actually the master of stupid questions.
That's very good, because I could well be asking a stupid question. Not this being my field, other than I do eat and digest stuff. Why did humans atrophose their appendix if we need all this bacteria and be able to, decompose all that leafy stuff that you're suggesting?
Well, it's thought now that the appendix is actually a reservoir of our own microbial fingerprint, because everyone has their own microbial pattern. It's quite individual to them. And we think that the appendix contains sort of like all of, it's like the backup copy So that if you have antibiotics or you have a gut illness or something, the opportunity is there to replenish with your normal gut flora. And we're actually we're looking at this at the moment. One of the studies that we've just finished data collection, we're going to actually be looking at whether having an appendix or not having an appendix makes a difference to how your gut reestablishes after you've had a colonoscopy, which is when you have the bowel prep and you get rid of everything. Whether having an appendix or not makes a difference. So we're going to be able to actually look at that in some detail. Great question.
Hi, thank you very much for that fascinating talk. Look, I've grown up with a traditional South Indian diet, which is lacto-vegetarian. I don't have any fish. My question is, where does the omega-3 acids come from, or what can I use for omega-3, considering I don't eat fish?
Yes, if you don't eat fish, you can certainly have nuts. So many nuts have the short chain omega-3 fatty acids that your body can elongate and turn into the long chain. You can get supplements now that are coming from algae. So they're not quite as good as the long chain where all the work's already been done for you in fish. But we also think that your microbes are so good at taking whatever it is that you feed them and working to make sure that they support your health. I mean, they synthesize neurotransmitters, they synthesize vitamins, and they also deal with environmental pollutants. So when we're exposed to all of these toxic pollutants in the environment, we think that it's actually our gut that does the work of cleaning them out. But the way we deal with nutrients and foods, we think is very dependent on our microbes. So if you've got a healthy gut, which you probably do if you're from South India and you've had all those lovely beans and vegetables and things, then your gut is probably very good at actually turning those plant-based omega-3 fatty acids into the long-chain version. But we don't know because we haven't done the research.
Thank you. Just a quick question about fermented foods. For example, sauerkraut and kombucha is very readily available at supermarkets, but I've heard that buying it from a supermarket that's like pre-made and mass-produced is not necessarily good, and you should make your own or find an organic store or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if that's true.
I think that some of the sauerkrauts that you can get in the supermarket, they've been pasteurised, which means that you won't have any live bacteria in them. But I think the main benefit of fermented foods is not actually live bacteria, it's the produce of that fermentation process, it's the metabolites, and all of those things should still be present. So I don't actually think that that's true. And I also know, for example, the people who do the remedy kombucha, which is very widely available, and they are really great the way that they do it, and they take it very seriously, and they're measuring all of the metabolites. So I think that that's more of an urban myth. It's a bit like the myth that you shouldn't use olive oil and heat it because you get all these toxic byproducts, which we know is simply not true. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and I think that that's one of them. But it is much cheaper to make your own fermented vegetables and kefir and kombucha at home.
Thank you.
It's coming down to you.
Good evening. Thank you very much for your talk. Considering we don't know each person's individual microbiome, what's going on in their guts, is it safe to say that they should be having fermented foods, etc., even though that could be boosting the good bacteria, even though they might have a surplus of good bacteria and not so much of the bad bacteria, creating an even bigger imbalance? So I'm noticing the trend of all these fermented foods coming up, and everyone thinks they're doing a good job for their gut. Not necessarily could be bad for them because they don't know what's going on in their guts.
I think fermented foods have been part of traditional diets forever because, of course, that's how we preserved food before we had refrigeration. And we think, based on the current evidence, that they are beneficial. As I said, the metabolites that are found in fermented foods are really important for health, and they even have things such as neurotransmitters in them. However, if people don't have a healthy, diverse gut to start with, and you start giving someone a whole stack of fermented foods, then they can definitely get tummy troubles. So you would introduce them slowly if people aren't used to having them. Similarly with the FODMAPs, you know, a lot of people react to the foods that are basically the best foods for bacteria, the high fibre foods, because their gut is not as healthy as it could be. And so the bacteria aren't there to be able to deal with the beans and the high fibre foods and the fruits and vegetables. So the idea, you know, one of my postdocs is one of the world experts in IBS and the FODMAP diet, and she said what you do is you put people onto a low FODMAP diet, but it's only ever supposed to be short term, and then you gradually introduce the FODMAP foods again, but include some probiotics, include some fermented foods, so that you're getting more bacteria in there that will hopefully develop this lovely healthy ecosystem like a rainforest that can deal with all of these foods. You don't want to starve your bacteria of the FODMAP foods, which is one of their really important food sources, for any length of time. So as one of my students said, the answer to a problem with beans might be more beans. Just do it gradually though.
So that one there and then one there.
Thank you. I just have a question in regards to medication and stimulant medication. Why can that sometimes reduce or cut out appetite for wanting to eat?
I can't answer that. It would have an impact on your nervous system. I'm not quite sure how it suppresses appetite because I don't know a lot about it, but what I do know is that any medication you take, anything that you're exposed to, will change your microbiota. What's very interesting is the recent understanding that, for example, antidepressant medications can actually work as antimicrobials, and antimicrobials, so some forms of antibiotics, can actually work as antidepressants. So just because something works to kill bacteria doesn't necessarily make it bad, because it could be that it's killing pathogenic bacteria. It could be part of the way in which antidepressants work. Anything you take, though, is going to have an influence on your bacteria, and they're your primary organ of adaptation. That's why this idea that, you know, genetically we're still the same as we were in pre-industrial times, therefore we should eat a hunter-gatherer diet. It's actually not true. When that idea was first promoted, we didn't know about the microbiome. We were thinking about our own genes, and yes, our own genes take millennia to change, but the microbiome can change within hours to adapt to food and whatever else is going on. So it's highly adaptive, but of course what it can't do is survive being killed off with lots of antibiotics and not giving it enough food, being starved out of existence, and that's basically what we're doing at the moment with a Western diet.
Hello. My partner has bipolar disorder, so everything the Food and Mood Centre is doing is just fascinating to me. What I'm sort of trying to work with him at the moment, I'm studying nutrition as well, but is how much fermented food to start with him, because I know obviously there's a lot of imbalance going on there. We've only known each other less than a year, so for 30 years of his life, his diet has been quite poor, and he's been on medication for quite a while. So what sort of level would you start someone at when you're trying to introduce fermented food?
I'd start pretty small, but I'm not a dietitian. I have a lot of my team members are dietitians, but it's not really been studied, so we don't really know, and everyone's likely to be very different. But I would say that you would get kefir. I think fermented dairy is particularly good, or even just yogurt, and just start off with small quantities and then gradually increase that, and then maybe, you know, you only need a tablespoon of fermented vegetables to get a whole heap of benefit. You know, so you can add them to sandwiches or to whatever you're eating. So you don't need a huge amount to get a lot of benefit. You can try miso soup, that's a pretty easy one. So just start gradually, but do try gradually over time to increase the amount of prebiotic food, which is your fruits and vegetables, lots of different whole grains. What we know too is that we need lots of different types of fibre, because you get non-fermentable fibre, you get moderately fermentable, and you get highly fermentable, and they all do different things, and your bacteria need all of them. So you can get some sorts of fibre from fruits and vegetables, but legumes, so your chickpeas and your lentils and those sorts of things, are very important sources of fibre. And of course your whole grains, your true whole grains. So, oats and buckwheat and barley and spelt and, I'm always on the run, so I use those pre-cooked black rice or brown rice from the supermarket. Just trying to get that diversity, because the more diverse the food you feed your bacteria, the more diverse your bacteria in the gut, and we think that that's a good thing.
We have a question from the live stream.
Yep.
At Bosler Oz asks, has there been any studies suggesting the impact of infection by way of bacteria, parasites and or viruses on gut health? And if so, are there any additional suggested foods to support a person's health to address these?
I think that whole area is just so new. We're co-located with the Geelong Centre for Emerging Infectious Diseases, and they're very interested in viruses and phages and things like that. But we've only just started to scratch the surface with the bacteria. And I know that there are people looking at viruses and fungi and those sorts of things, but it's in its very early stages. So we can't answer that question at the moment. We need a lot more research. In Australia, it's very difficult to get funding for gut microbiota research or microbiota research in general. I've been trying for years. In the US, they're a lot further ahead of us. There's a lot of people doing it. But there's no research groups to my knowledge that are looking at, in humans, mental health. So there's groups over in the US who are looking a lot at IBS and those sorts of things, but not mental health. So we just desperately need more research. And for that, we need research funding.
One of the ones just up there. Yep.
Okay. Is the correct way to say fungi?
I don't know.
Because you just said fungi.
Yeah.
So.
No idea. I'm probably wrong.
Okay.
You say fungi, and I just think mushrooms. Yum.
Okay. Just wait for the microphone.
There's self-testing microbiome, I think I'm saying that right, kits available. Is that kind of technology accurate? If you could comment on that, please.
Look, I think it is, but what the information is going to do for you is very unclear, because we don't know what's a good bacteria, what's a bad bacteria. I mean, we've got some ideas. We know in general the bifidobacteria and the lactobacillus seem to be good. They're called probiotics because they seem to have a health benefit. And we think that things such as, and also Prevotella, the Prevotella species, we think that Bolophila, being quite pro-inflammatory, is a problem. Microba is a group with whom we work. They're at the University of Queensland. I don't know if anyone saw the 3-part Catalyst series on gut last year that I was on, but we had reports from Microba, and they do metagenomics, which means that they look at all of the genes in your gut, and it gives you some idea about what the genes can do, which is better than just describing what's there. So they do a report and they give you very, very detailed dietary feedback and those sorts of things, but it's expensive, the gene sequencing, I think it's about $450. So you could do it, but we don't know yet whether it's how much benefit it has. If I had $450, I might do it, but, I think without needing to know the details of what's going on in there, we already know what we need to do to make it better.
We do need to wrap it up fairly soon. We'll have time for one more question, please. This lady in the middle here.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if you would know if food intolerances can be reversed, because it's very difficult to stick to a really good, supposed healthy diet when you have severe food intolerance.
Yes, I think that's a really good question. And again, we need more research. I know that there's a lot of people working on ways of addressing food intolerances. What we do know though, so one of my colleagues at MCRI is Professor Mimi Tang. We don't know why, but Melbourne is the food allergy capital of the world. It's also one of the asthma capitals of the world. Now, the work that she and her colleagues have done at MCRI has just been extraordinary, because we know that nut allergies are posing a really significant danger to children, and they're increasing. And so what they did was that they gradually fed, in a safe environment, ground up peanuts to children along with probiotics. And what they found was that they were able to actually get rid of the nut allergy. No, that's right, but this is the first study that's done that, so it's just pointing to the fact that we may be able to use similar strategies to address food intolerances. Yep.
I know that there are so many more questions. This has been an absolutely fascinating talk. Thank you so much, Felice. Let's give her another big round of applause.